Maastricht toe.
Wat gaan we daar doen?
Nou, we gaan kijken naar lezingen voor het onvoorwaardelijk basisinkomen.
Oké, lijkt je ook een beetje op de weg?
Oh ja, sorry. Maar het is hartstikke cool hoor. Dan gaan we even kijken, even vragen stellen, even een interviewtje doen. En misschien gaan we ook wel even livestreamen. Dus het wordt hartstikke leuk.
Nou, ben benieuwd.
Ja, we kunnen allemaal kijken. Veel plezier.
Dankjewel.
Doei.
Hier in het Stay OK Hotel of Hostel van Maastricht, waar de 25-jarige viering plaatsvindt van, van de vereniging Basisinkomen.
Oh, mooi man. En kun jij iets de mensen vertellen wat het dan eigenlijk inhoudt, dat basisinkomen?
Het basisinkomen is een inkomen dat door de overheid wordt verstrekt aan iedere burger. En het wordt maandelijks uitgekeerd en het is onvoorwaardelijk. Het is per persoon, dus individueel. Het is hoog genoeg om van te kunnen leven en het is voor iedereen.
Nou, hartstikke mooi man.
We're here for the Congress of the Unconditional Basic Income. And what can you tell us about the basic income?
Well, I've been lobbying and working for a basic income for many years, and we founded Bea, the Basic Income Earth Network, exactly 30 years ago, and the Dutch one is 25 years old this year. So we are at a certain stage where the ideas around basic income have become well formulated. We've dealt with all the classic objections, and we've found with our pilots in various countries with which I've been involved, there are lots of advantages of moving to a basic income. A basic income would mean that every man, every woman and every child in the Netherlands or in Britain would receive a modest monthly payment with which to be able to have a greater sense of control of their lives. In a sense, it would be a small social dividend on the wealth and contributions of all the previous generations who've built the wealth of our countries. Just as the rich get inherited money for doing nothing, to a certain extent you can say that everybody should receive that basic security. And what we know from our psychological and economic experiments is that people who have basic security work more, not less.
Yes.
And when they work, they are more productive, not less. And also that people who have basic security are more tolerant of others, are more altruistic, they care about their communities more, they care about other people more, and they're more socially responsible and they're active. We have to get away from that old puritanical way of looking at helping ourselves and our families and individuals and talk about deserving versus undeserving. This way, moralistic, it's always judgmental, it's usually very incorrect, and we have to realize that giving trust to other people as you would wish to be given trust by them is vital. And I think we've reached an interesting phase where politically we're in danger. Every European country today is in danger of political extremism, xenophobia, racism, anti-women, anti-the disabled, anti-groups with vulnerabilities. And we're in danger of seeing a drift to some sort of neo-fascist populism. So I think that we've got to a stage where the precariat, the growing precariat about which I've been writing in my books, is getting very angry. Some part of it, the less educated, are going to vote for this extreme right in various ways. And the left and progressive younger generation are looking for a gentler, progressive, ecological future. And I believe that a basic income is not a panacea, it's not a solution to every problem, but it should be part of the package of reforms that a good society for the 21st century needs. We need it. It's not a thing that would be nice, it's needed. And we've got to rethink where we want to take progressive thinking. And we need to tell our younger generation of politicians, you put this into your head and lead us, because that is the future.
Hartstikke mooi klinkt dat. Je bent er al een tijdje mee bezig, hè?
Ja, eigenlijk wel. Maar met mij nog veel anderen hoor. Het is een heel oud idee. Het bestaat al een jaar of 500. En heel veel bekende en beroemde mensen hebben zich ermee bezig gehouden. Zoals economen, filosofen, dichters, Nederlanders, buitenlanders, allerlei mensen. En de laatste jaren zie je dat er steeds meer aandacht voor komt. Dat is heel goed. Omdat mensen zien dat de manier hoe we nu bezig zijn met de economie, met de sociale zekerheid, dat het gewoon niet werkt.
Dus je ziet vooruitgang.
Ik zie veel vooruitgang, ja. Er worden veel experimenten worden nu ook gestart. Niet alleen in Nederland, maar ook in andere landen. En niet alleen experimenten. In Zwitserland is er een referendum geweest waarin mensen zich hebben uitgesproken over een basisinkomen. Dus volgend jaar, als het goed is, gaat het in het parlement komen. En dan komt het er waarschijnlijk dus ook. En in Finland zie je initiatieven in Spanje, in Griekenland, in Polen, in Nederland dus ook. Eigenlijk in de hele wereld. In Brazilië. Het gaat hartstikke... In Brazilië is het zelfs al opgenomen in de grondwet, hè, dat er een basisinkomen er moet komen, stapsgewijs. Er zijn nu 60 miljoen Brazilianen die een soort van basisinkomen ontvangen. En de bedoeling is dat op termijn alle Brazilianen het gaan ontvangen. Dus dat is allemaal hartstikke goed.
Maar dat klinkt zeker mooi.
Ja.
Dankjewel.
Alsjeblieft.
What interests me is what I see in society is more poverty and we have to pay for everything what's already ours. And a basic income will assure you can pay for your home, you can pay for your energy, you can pay for your water. So it's weird. We are the only species who have to pay to live.
That's nicely put. That's nicely put. I mean, the way I put it in my new book is that all of our societies have the commons, which are the land, the water, the air, the sea. It all belongs to all of us.
Yes.
And yet we've allowed our civilization to evolve to the point where only a tiny minority are making huge profits out of the land, the water, the air, or whatever. And we need to reclaim the commons.
Yes.
And it's part of the same debate. It's part of a debate about reinventing a future in which a good society rests on everybody feeling they're treated as an equal.
Yes.
And that must mean you have basic security to make your life, for your children, for yourself, for your community, and to feel in control. To feel in control. Feel in extremis, and if some oppressor, be it a man to a woman, be it a boss to a worker, be it the state to an individual, we can all turn around and say no.
Yes.
That's very important. The ability to say no.
We don't want it anymore. We want a better life.
Want better, and we want to be able to be in control enough to make our own decisions.
Yes.
And that is a different mentality that we need to revive and strengthen.
Yeah.
And that's why I believe in a basic income.
De triomfantelijke terugkeer van het basisinkomen. This was the title of a big article in De Groene Amsterdammer. Who can say when this article was published? Had a try? 1985, June 1985. Okay. Now I think it was a bit of an exaggeration. It was a terugkeer, but calling it triomfantelijk was perhaps a bit premature. But certainly this is a title which the Groene Amsterdammer or other papers could use today. But perhaps, as we've just been warned, not for long. And I'll return to that at the end of my little speech. Before that, let me start with, in an awful way in front of this audience, by asking what a basic income is. Now, nearly all of you have been involved in the basic income movement for quite a while. Not all of them, because I'm very pleased to see in the crowd my old friend from the Boy Scouts and Rector Magnificus of the University of Maastricht, Luc Soete, and his wife. who've joined us for this session. So, if only for his sake, if not for the others, for their sake, let me just quickly say what the basic income is. The basic income shares 3 unconditionalities with the existing bijstand. It is different from the bijstand because of 3 other unconditionalities, and it shares with the bijstand 3 conditionalities, right? Guy already alluded to the fact that we shouldn't say too quickly that the basic income is unconditional. So I run quickly through these 9 things. 1, like a bijstand, it's unconditional in the sense that it's given in cash. It's not given in the form of vouchers or in kind, like food stamps are, for example. 2, it's unconditional in the sense that it's not restricted to citizens. Other residents who are not citizens of the country should be entitled to it. 3, more important for the very design of it, it's unconditional in the sense that it's not restricted to the people who've contributed to a social insurance system. That's the key difference, of course, with what is now the central pillar of our social security system. These are the 3 common unconditionalities. Then there are the 3 differences between basic income and bijstand. The first one is that it's strictly individual. Nota bene, none of the experiments we've been talking about today, the Finnish ones or the Dutch ones, include this inconditionality, the strictly individual nature, in the design of the experiment. Okay? So this will remain the difference between what's being experimented and the real basic income. But the experimentation is about the other 2 unconditionalities that are distinctive of a basic income. It's not means tested. That means that you get the basic income and income from other sources can be combined with it. Okay, that's so-called universality of a basic income. And then there is the absence of a work test or participatie test, and the idea that you must be available on the labor market in order to be entitled to it, or fulfill some other condition of participation. And so a basic income is also unconditional in this sense. So 3 differences with bijstand: strictly individual, no means test, no work test. What does it mean that the basic income is unconditional? No, there are still conditions attached. 1, as once mentioned by Guy, it's restricted to legal residents. You need to have some sort of legal status in order to be entitled to it. Many of us would like more people who are currently illegal to be legalized, but you need to be a legal resident to be entitled to it. That's one difference. All legal residents, no. As was also alluded to before, people who are in prison get already some sort of basic income in kind, right? They get housing free of charge, not the sort of housing they would choose spontaneously, but they get food, etc. So they should get a basic income as soon as they get out of prison. But while they are in prison, they are legal residents in the country, but as long as they are incarcerated, they won't get a basic income in cash. And finally, there's a further conditionality, so it's not all the legal residents who are not in prison. No, the diplomats shouldn't get it. It's a very marginal category of people in most places in the world, but not in the city in which I live, in which bureaucrats count as diplomats and therefore are not submitted to the to the regular federal income tax. They and their families should not be entitled to basic income. This may make it more difficult to sell the idea to the European Union that everyone is entitled except. But it depends, of course, and I return to that, on the scale at which you introduce basic income. Okay, this is now, in case you didn't know before, you know what the basic income is and what the difference is and the commonalities with the existing base. Second question, which I'm asking you, in thinking, you won't even need a second to answer that question, but I want you to answer that question by raising your hands. What will be the effect of the introduction of a basic income on the labor market? Will it lead to a rise in the average level of the wages, or will it lead to a fall in the average wage level? Okay, I'll give you 5 seconds to think about it. So who thinks it will lead to a rise in the level of the wages? Those raise their hands. Who thinks that it will lead to a fall in the average level of the wages? It is terrible. This room of people who've been working, thinking about basic income for a long time, are divided about equally among the people who answer this question in one way, and the people who answer that question in a different way.
We don't know. We don't know.
And in addition, a number of people, after all these years of thinking about it, still don't know. Okay, so let me then carry on by saying, of course, both groups are at the same time right and wrong. Because what needs, the crucial distinction needs to be made between the jobs that are interesting in themselves because of the training they offer, because of the networks in which they want to enter, the prospects they offer, because of the intrinsic pleasantness of performing them. We've just been taught by Bono that if he had a basic income, he would do exactly the same thing as what he's doing now. So you have those jobs, and then you have the shitty jobs, the jobs you only do because you are forced to do them. And that makes, and what's really crucial in all our arguments for basic income is to insist on the coupling of the two unconditionalities which I mentioned as distinctive, 2 of the 3 unconditionalities I mentioned as distinctive of a basic income, namely they're being universal, not means tested, and at the same time unconditional in the sense of not being work tested. Because of the universality, the possibility of combining a basic income with income from another sources, it makes it possible to say yes to certain jobs, to even at the extreme, jobs that pay nothing, internships, for example, which provide a lot of training, but because if you have your basic income, you can do it. You are not forced to do something else. And it's a matter of degree. You can accept to be paid less to the extent that what it made possible. Of course, it depends on the level of basic income, etc. But it's basic income, because of universality, gives the possibility to say yes to certain jobs to which you can't say yes now. And at the same time, because of the other unconditionality, the absence of a work test, availability to work, it gives you the possibility to say no to jobs, to say, well, this job, I mean, my boss treats me badly, it's an uninteresting job, I learn nothing, I just give up this job. And giving up this job under current conditions, which shows that you are voluntarily unemployed and therefore entitled to nothing. It depends a bit, there are all sort of nuances in the various systems from country to country, but even the basic welfare is restricted to the people who are involuntarily unemployed. Well, with a basic income, you can say, you can be voluntarily unemployed, clearly, to everyone, and still be entitled to it. That makes it possible to give up jobs in this way. Okay? But not any job, and that means that you will have at the same time a possibility to create jobs. Many of them may not exist, and many part-time jobs, etc., that don't pay enough, but that are attractive for these various non-pecuniary, not immediately pecuniary reasons. So at the same time, you will have a pressure towards the development of those jobs, but also a pressure towards the disappearance or the better payment of other jobs which are less attractive in themselves. And the two things really need to be combined. Okay, in this slide, let us turn to the question central to this whole meeting of what can be learned from the basic income experiments. And I'll take the case in which the experiment is perfectly designed. People who've described them before have already mentioned the number of difficulties. And so I assume it's perfectly designed in the sense that you really have a randomized experiment. You can take a random sample of the relevant population, you have a control group, you apply supposedly a real basic income to the sample to which which is in the experiment itself, and you don't use, you check what's happening to the control group at the same time. So suppose it's perfectly designed. And I'm going to go through 3 intrinsic difficulties, intrinsic limitations about what we can learn from these experiments. And it will be very important also, return to that, in order to frame what we shall learn from them, from these experiments, and how the results will need to be interpreted. But let me first say, before turning to that, why I think these experiments are nonetheless, despite these limitations, why they are important. Well, they will certainly learn us a number of things. For example, they tell us, they'll be able to assess the statement often heard that once you suppress the obligation on the welfare claimants, the obligation to be available for work, then none of them will look for work. This statement will be assessed. Will some people, will all people be looking for work despite the fact that they are not obliged to do so and so on? You can learn something about that. You can also learn something about, that's when the work test is eliminated. What about when the means test is eliminated? Is the fact that the means test is eliminated, will it lead to more people looking for work, finding work, than with the current means test? You'll be able to learn something about that. But I'll go in a minute and say why these lessons are in fact only of extremely limited importance for assessing the real impact of the introduction of a basic income. But the other reason why these experiments are important and why I look at them in a positive way, as was mentioned before, especially by Scheer, is their propaganda effect. The fact that something is happening somewhere, immediately it's misrepresented, people exaggerate what's happening, they anticipate what's happening and what may never happen, and this goes into the social media, from the social media into the newspapers, from newspapers into television. And that's why, to just mention one example, and you've experienced many more, I'm sure, in this country, I got phoned by RTL, the private television channel in Belgium, to say, on the phone, to say, look, they've just introduced a basic income in Finland, could we come and interview you, because we think you've been involved in this sort of thing for a long time. So I said, look, relax, it's not being introduced, it is blah, blah. I will come, at what time can we come? So I come with that crew, they think 5 people in my study at home, and then a quick interview. They interview me for 15 minutes. The first time they say, can you repeat in simple words? Okay, you try that in simple words, and then oh, thank you, you'll see it will be on the news in the evening. Then on the news in the evening, then you hear, et maintenant nous vous parlons, and now we talk about the introduction of basic income in Finland. And then you have, it was before Christmas, so you had to say Father Christmas, apparently in Finland, on the snow, coming with lots of presents in the back, and while they explain, of course, largely wrongly what's happening, then you see a little passage from my interview, which was probably the only sentence that could get in a self-contained way, but which was just a qualification I made in all the rest. And then that was it, all right? And that was it. But, so you can say this is ridiculous, and this is really... But at the same time, the people, you know, I never watch television, but the way people watch television, where they see this thing, and Finland has quite a good reputation in Belgium because our educational system, especially in Francophone Belgium, is not so good, and Finland is supposed to be the very best in Europe. Now Finland, which has this good reputation, we only talk about Finland when it's about their education system, and now they have this thing with Father Christmas bringing basic income to them. So since then, so it's in the ears of the people, and then they're paying a bit more attention, and then politicians, when they see that journalists seem to be favored to the idea of thinking it has been introduced somewhere, they don't want to be too much behind, so they pretend to know something about it, etc. And this is, of course, it's all very imperfect, but that's the way in which our media system, our political system. Oh, I'm supposed to be here. It's not for FDL you are working on. So right. Then, so that's why I think it's important. Now, the limitations. And it's important, very important in my view, for a group like this to see these limitations, to understand them properly, because of what's going to happen as a result of this sort of debate. And so that the sort of thing, information we already receive from Finland or from here today, and can be processed and used in the right way in order to be able to understand what we can really learn and not learn. What are the three intrinsic limitations of what we can learn from experiments? Well, the first one is about the labor supply response. That is, so I'll formulate the thing simply. You say, well, you introduce this basic income scheme, let's assume under the conditions I've mentioned before, so perfect design and so on, and you can assert that the scheme had an impact on the behavior of the people, of the subjects of the experiment. They modified that behavior. But what is it that you tested the impact of? A basic income? Okay, but for how long? People were told you are going to get this basic income for 2 years, for 3 years, perhaps, in the best case. But how do you react to that? Do you react to that differently from the way you would react if you were told this is going to be for life? Some people may say, well, this is a unique opportunity, I'll do something else for these 2 years. But some other people will say, well, this is only for 2 years, I'm not going to give up my job, I'm not going to... And so what will be the net effect in terms of the difference? We don't know. We don't know. Moreover, the way you react to that is likely to be different depending on whether you are the first in, the only one, the first but also the only one in your whole environment who gets a basic income, from the way you would react if everyone in your environment had this further possibility, because that will also affect the behavior of the others, and the behavior of the others will affect yours. That's the first limitation. Okay, so we don't, because the fact that it's only a random sample of people, and because it's for a limited time, you can't infer from this experiment what a whole population would do in case basic income was introduced with the perspective of being for the rest of their lives. Okay, so that's the first thing. Secondly, and in a way even more importantly, and that's related to what I said about the possibility of saying yes and no to a job, is the adjustment of the demand for jobs. The other side, what jobs will be provided? Well, the fact that workers will be willing to say yes for jobs, will be capable of saying yes to jobs for which they can't say yes now because they don't pay enough. Internships or jobs, poorly paid part-time jobs, pleasant jobs, self-employed jobs with an uncertain income stream, etc. So, when you have only a few people who are given this option, of course the labour market won't adjust by providing these sort of jobs. And so it's 150 people in Utrecht or so, or even if we're 5,000 people or so, but in a labour market of 300,000 people or 10 million people, this won't have any impact on what jobs are being provided. And also on the other side, if it's just a few people who are given the opportunity to say, fuck this job now, I'll just take the basic income and then look for something else, of course it won't have any impact on the shitty jobs. If everyone gets a basic income, we can expect that these jobs will be, it will be difficult to find people to fill them, which will not be the case with just a partial experiment. And because it's difficult to fill them, either you'll have to make them more pleasant. If you can't, or if you don't want to make them more pleasant or more interesting, then you may want to replace them by machines, automate them. Or if none of these possibilities is possible, as you just indicated by doing this, you pay more for these jobs. Okay. And now they have this thing with Father Christmas bringing basic income to them. So since then, so it's in the ears of the people, and then they're paying a bit more attention, and then politicians, when they see that journalists seem to be favourable to the idea, or think it has been introduced somewhere. They don't want to be too much behind, so they pretend to know something about it, etc. And this is, of course, it's all very imperfect, but that's the way in which our media system, our political system, I'm supposed to be here. It's not for FDL you are working on, so right. Then, so that's why I think it's important. Okay. But all these impacts, which are really crucial in the case for a basic income, none of them can be shown, can appear, even in the best experiment, right? Okay, and this is really because of, okay, I've got 5 more minutes. Then 3, the third, so actually you have first limitation at the level of now with my 5 minutes, I forgot my third point. Yes. Oh, even more important than the other 2. So the first one is at the level of labor supply, so how you react. Second, at the level of labor demand, and of course, and labor demand adjust the labor supply just in turns, etc., and you get to a new equilibrium. But the third thing, which also intrinsically you can't test, and that's why the opponents of the basic income cannot possibly ever be convinced by an experiment, by the result of an experiment. The first thing is that you can never test the funding, the net funding dimension of a basic income scheme. You can involve in your experiments the people who will be net beneficiaries, people who will get as a result of the scheme a higher income than they would otherwise have been. This, whether you rely only on voluntary, on volunteers, or you, as was suggested in the case of Poland, the preference of the experimenters, you impose it on the people, well, you can only get volunteers if they are better off as a result, and you can only impose it on people if you make them better off. You can't say, look, with the scheme fully in place, you'll be one of the net contributors to the scheme, so you'll get your basic income, but the funding will be such that you'll have a lower income than is currently the case. That would be the case for me, for example. If we had a basic income of 800 euros or 1,000 euros in Belgium, I wouldn't have a higher income. I would have, if it's funded by the federal income tax, I would have a somewhat lower net income than I have now, because I'm among the better paid. University professor at the end of his career is paid among the 5% richer people in the world. Sorry, so that's the third reason. And so I'll.
You can
okay.
miss it.
Sorry.
You can miss it.
I can. I'm like you. I'm not fighting basic income to make myself rich, right? I'm making it. I'm defending it because, as Guy said, because it's just, because it will. Okay. So, given that now I must have about 3 minutes left, if not 2.5, let me then just, and we can return to other things in discussion. So I'll skip what I would otherwise have said on euro dividend, we can return to that, and on participation income. But the key message is that experiments can play a useful role, the double role I mentioned at the beginning, but this is not the way we are going to get the assurance that we can move forward. How can we move forward? Well, exactly the same way, or in a way analogous to the way in which we move forward with the other 2 models of social protection, or the other 2 forms of solidarity, to take the expression from the Frisian participant early. What were they? We had public assistance, born at the beginning of the 16th century. We had social insurance, born at the end of the 19th century with Bismarck, and there is social dividend. I think it's also for this purpose to talk about social dividend here. That should arise now and be implemented now. These are 3 fundamentally distinct forms of social protection. How did people dare to introduce them when they were total utopias? How did that? Did Bismarck organize any randomized experiments with pensioners before he saw? No. Did the Ypres municipality, which was the first one to introduce sort of bijstand, the sort of public assistance, did I use? No. What did I do? I just introduced them at a modest level. At a modest level. The levels of public assistance in Ypres or in Bruges when the public assistance was first introduced in Western Europe, they were of course at a level that's ridiculous even compared to GDP per capita at the time, relative to the current levels of bijstand in the Netherlands. The levels of Bismarck's basic pension, not basic pension, the levels of workers' pension, Bismarck's workers' pensions were ridiculous compared to the level of even the basic pension currently in the Netherlands. So it was introduced in that way, slowly, and that's what we need to do. That's why we need what has been called, perhaps unfortunately, partial basic income, meaning something that's unconditional in the sense as I've indicated before, 1 minute, but partial, the expression came from Holland, in fact, when I spoke about de triomfantelijke terugkeer van het basisinkomen. In fact, it was at the time the WRR, the official commission set up by the government to talk about, at the time, the future of social security. Well, the WRR had advocated een gedeeltelijk basisinkomen. That's where the notion partial basic income comes from, and it was proposed at half the level of bijstand for a couple. So that was not sufficient to live on if living alone. Well, I think we need to go that way. I don't believe in a participation income, except as a sort of way into it that may make it politically more acceptable. I finish now with a conclusion, just saying two things. One related to what Bono said, somewhat in a I would say, in a despondent way, discouraging way, say, look, there is a lot of enthusiasm now, but don't be under no illusion it's going to go away quite soon. I think the way we need to see that is like the tide. You are at low tide, and you see the waves moving forward. And of course, if you think that whenever a wave moves forward, it will go all the way to the high tide, you are under an illusion. Of course, it goes, and it goes back. And sometimes the next wave is a bit lower than the previous one. But in the end, you always get to the high tide, because on the whole thing. So I think what we need to do is combine short-term pessimism. And so you must always think, well, this wave will recede, right? But in the end, we'll get there. That's one comment. And the second comment, which I really think will be crucial in the framing of the results of the experiments, is that basic income is not mainly about the alleviation of poverty. We'll need to combine basic income with means-tested, sort of targeted things to release income poverty, especially for the people living alone. But basic income is fundamentally, and Guy also said, and other people said, it's about freedom. Giving freedom to all people, not only to the poor, but of course mostly to the most vulnerable, more to women than to men. Because you give people more options, and then it's for people to decide what they do with these options. And so, in the whole thing, when people say, look, we'll say, and they will say that, look, we've made these experiments and we see that the labor supply has been diminishing, or it's not increased as much as you said it's in, we must say, first, think about the dynamic effects, which are not taken into account, so going back to what I said before, and above all, so what? What we want is make people free. It's not to try to keep them as busy as possible. It's busy in the sense of being in the paid employment sphere. The point is to make them free, give them free, use this rent in a way, this surplus we have, in order to enable people, and especially the most vulnerable, to make better choices in their lives by giving them the power to choose. Give the power to choose to the people who have the information about the various possibilities they have. So that's why basic income is such a good idea. But to make it move forward, we need to be smart, and you are.
Als je ook iets wilt doen, bij wilt dragen aan het idee van het basisinkomen, omdat je het zelf wil, omdat je vindt dat het een mensenrecht is om te kunnen leven. Zonder daarvoor allerlei onzinwerk te hoeven doen. Als je zelf wil bepalen hoe je een volwaardig lid van de samenleving kunt zijn, dan moet je naar www.basisinkomen.nl gaan. Dan kun je lid worden van de vereniging. Dat hoeft je niks te kosten. Als je wilt bijdragen, financieel kan het. Maar als je op een andere manier wil bijdragen, is het ook heel goed. Doordat je bijvoorbeeld filmpjes wil maken, zoals Michel. Of omdat je een ander artistiek talent hebt. Of omdat je wil praten. Of omdat je mensen bij elkaar wil brengen. Dat heb iedereen nodig. Want uiteindelijk gaat het erom dat het in de harten van de mensen gaat leven. Want als het bij ons leeft, dan kan het uiteindelijk ook komen. Want alle veranderingen beginnen bij jezelf.
Bevrijd jezelf.